There's no doubt that failure really, really sucks. No normal human being, at least that I know, would like to fail if they can avoid it. But what if I tell you that failure is a good thing? Would you agree? So let me show you uh, what I mean by that in a few minutes. But before we unpack this interesting topic, good evening, friends. Welcome back to Karating. As you can tell, we are in the village, and tonight we're just taking it easy right before everybody goes to bed. My sisters are putting together some smoothie, and these things just taste amazing. And so I'm sure you'll enjoy by just viewing. So, folks who are visiting us for the first time, I hope you can subscribe. But even if you don't, we're just glad that you're able to join us this evening. Now, recently, I won a research award from one of the international professional communities I've been a part of for many, many years. And one of the reasons, in fact, this is one of the reasons I had to travel back recently to the US to attend the conference. And this specific award has two versions of it. One is a student version, and then you have the professor version of it. So I remember about 11 years ago, maybe almost 12 years ago, I self nominated for the student award. And I really, really worked my butt off. And most of what I presented was my doctoral dissertation. I was so pumped about it because I was very sure I was going to win. And after looking at other proposals, I was like, I felt very confident. And of course, surprise, surprise, I did not win. I didn't even rank amongst the top three. Even though I was super hopeful, the truth is I clearly was not good enough. And so I didn't win. And I was incredibly bummed. And I swore never to be involved with things like that. You can imagine once you put your heart and soul to something and you've worked for days and days and days, and I believe my doctoral dissertation was the best, of course, at the time. I was incredibly disappointed, and I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with this sort of competitions. So I moved on. And then 11 or 12 years later, just recently, I just came back from Kenya, and I traveled to a conference, the same conference in Washington, D.C., and I absolutely had no idea that one of the professors who uses my research had nominated me now for the Professor Award. I really had no idea. And so in one of those evening receptions, then I hear my phone blowing up and people call me. I just realized I had won the award, something I never applied for, didn't even know. And this was quite a surprise given the first experience I had with the student version of it. And so I don't say this to brag about this accomplishment. I'm only using this to illustrate some of the small wins in my line of work that really keep us going. And this really comes against a backdrop of incredible failures that I've experienced and that I continue to experience in my life as a professor. And I'll share with you some of these failures, starting with my personal life. Those of you who are close to me already know that the year 2022 was literally the worst year on earth for my family. I lost two siblings back to back. My sister, who follows me, went to a hospital, one of those hospitals right directly opposite Kisumu International Airport. And those folks simply really mishandled her. And then she came back home, collapsed, and died. And this is a really young person who was in her 30s, doing really well, thriving. And to me, it was simply a case of medical negligence, which unfortunately is not unique in Kenya and not even unique in America. In many cases, black women really get dismissed when they really deserve attention. And so this was a horrific experience. And so I had to travel home, we buried, and then I came back. As soon as I landed in LA, my brother was killed in a horrific road accident somewhere on State House Road in Kisumu. And I just felt like my world was going to end. I have not experienced anything of that sort. And so one of the things I am really depressed about with this particular event is that I wonder how life would have been had I succeeded in bringing them to America. as many of you know, we always try to bring the people we love. We've done a lot to try and bring them, but it just never worked out for these two of my siblings. And so I always walk with this sense of guilt that if I succeeded in bringing them to America, maybe they would still be alive. Sometimes I wonder. And then, of course, some of the things that could be considered as a failure in my life is I wonder what life would have been had I had kids early in life. Because a lot of my peers that I went to school with many, many years ago now have kids in high school or in college. And for me, I'm just starting the journey. I still have very young kids. And sometimes I wonder what life would have been like had I had kids early in life. But I guess we'll never know. But either way, I think there are benefits and there are losses. Either way, those who have kids when they're younger may face some unique struggles too. But, we will never know. And one of the areas that I think I've really failed as a parent is with language. I always desired to get my kids to speak Luo and Swahili. My kids don't speak anything Swahili. The Luo we are trying. I give them instruction in the Luo, but they hardly speak back. And that's one of the places I've really failed. That I truly wished my kids would speak Swahili and the Luo. And then, of course, our home in Karateng, we've made extraordinary mistakes. Some of them incredibly expensive. Like right now, we are going to have to redo at least 3 bathrooms. And then we've got mistakes that were made on the upper side of a roof that is probably going to cost us almost a million shillings to repair. So lots of mistakes. And then the most really eye-opening and the most really touching are the failures that happen around people that trust me. Sometimes when I fail people who depend on me to make the right choices, those kinds of failures really get at me. And of course, for privacy's sake, I may not talk about specific examples, but I am one of those people that really hate it when I let down people who are depending on me to do the right thing. And on the professional side of life, I've also had incredible failures. And I'll just share with you a few examples. If I had so much time, I would. But I'll give you about 4 examples. Number one, as a kid, when I mentioned to you earlier, I went to Kanyawanga High School, which is in southern Nyanza. And of course, my home is in Karateng. I was hoping to go to a university very far away from home. In fact, Kenyatta University was my ideal university, in part because that's where my dad went, and that's the only university I'd ever visited outside of Maseno. And after high school, I ended up being admitted into Maseno, and I absolutely hated it because Maseno is right in the middle of Karateng. And so I didn't want to go to school in my neighborhood. I can literally walk from Maseno to my home right now. And to make it even worse, my desk mate at the time in Kanyawanga, a young man called Desmond Otieno, he was actually admitted to KU. And I was like, I thought I was disappointed. But it turned out that the Maseno decision was one of the best things that has ever happened in my life. And I'll tell you more about it later on. Now, moving first forward to the US, I moved to Western Pennsylvania. That's where I did my master's. And as an international student, of course, I was in desperate need of financial support. And so one graduate assistant position opened up and I applied. And there was only 2 of us that applied. One was a new student and the other one was me, who had been there for 1 semester. I had a perfect 4.0 GPA. I had everything lined up. The professors knew me. And this was really going to save my life because it was going to help me with the tuition. I wouldn't have to hustle so much. And of course, unfortunately, I was not given. This position was given to the other white guy who I later learned was actually less qualified than I was because he became a personal friend. I knew his GPA and everything else. But they gave it to him, they didn't give it to me. And this decision really affected me. Because for one, I had to really struggle to pay fees. It took me like 9 months after graduation to just finish paying my tuition. Missed lots of research opportunities with my professors and much more. And that experience also made it very difficult for me to apply for PhD opportunities. So when I was applying for PhD programs, I applied for 3 schools and I missed my top university. In part because I don't think I was just as strong a candidate at that time because I didn't have much research experience. And that really cost me a lot of money. And then thankfully enough, out of the 3 schools I applied, I got the other 2 with full funding. So I chose to go to Virginia Commonwealth University, which at the time I didn't know much about. And besides my experience as a student, I've also had lots of experiences with grants. Over the years, I've gotten multi-million dollar grants, but I've also applied for so many grants that I never got, and I was so hopeful. And sometimes I've lost grants where it really was something very flimsy, like I missed a deadline by 12 seconds and lost $1.2 million. And that's how tough our deadlines are with things like grants and all that. So 12 seconds really cost me $1.2 million in grants. And those things can be really painful. So in my line of work, rejections are very common, whether it's articles we submit, grants and things like that. It really can be painful, but I've gotten through a whole lot of that. So here's why I think failure can be a good thing. The first is that I think failure, in many cases, not all cases, comes as a blessing in disguise. For example, when I missed my chance to go to Nairobi for school, I went to Maseno, and it turned out that that was the best thing that would have happened. I graduated on time, and I had a fantastic time in Maseno. In fact, many of my friends that went to Kenyatta at the time could not graduate in 4 years like we did in Maseno. And then the PhD program that I went to in Virginia actually turned out to be one of the top schools in my area of work. They gave me full funding. In fact, they were paying me 3 times what my top school would have paid me. The school that didn't admit me was going to give me a third of what Virginia gave me in terms of scholarships and student support. So it was wonderful. In addition to that, Virginia was paying me the entire year, January through December, while my top school was not going to pay me in the summer. So I was going to really have a hard time. In fact, many of my friends who went to my top schools ended up taking 4 years to graduate from the PhD program. But thankfully for me, because of the many folks that God lined up in Virginia, I ended up finishing my PhD in 3 years, became an assistant professor by the time I was 30, ended up going for early tenure and promotion, and became a full professor at 40. So most of this just happened because of some of what appeared as failures, when it turned out that God was just putting me on a better path. So when I look back, there are many cases where I did not get what I wanted, but I got something that was an alternate. And those alternates eventually turned out to be better than what I really desired. And so I've come to learn that in many cases, of course not all, sometimes those elements of failure can come with blessings. So it's really tempered how I respond to failure. Now, the second reason why I think failure is a good thing for people, especially for people like me, is that this experience of failure really keep me grounded. I'm one of those people who was not born with a natural earthing wire, so I don't stay grounded out of how I was born by nature. So these experiences of failure often remind me to be tempered whenever I experience success. Because, I mean, some people naturally are really good at staying grounded. I'm not one of those people. Sometimes success can get into my head. Especially, I remember many years when I would get grants back to back. I would apply, get it, I would apply, get it back to back. I would start feeling like I'm invisible in some ways. And so whenever I lose opportunities, it really sets me down and reminds me to stay humble. Because humility does not come natural for me. Some people it does not for me. And so when I look at the scholarships I've missed, the grants I've missed, and all these other experiences of failure, when I submit an article that in my head is amazing and I miss it, it just reminds me to stay grounded. And so overall, here's how I've learned to deal with failures. One, whatever I do, I give it all. For me, it's either you give it all or you don't. I'm not one of those people where it's in between. Number two, I allow myself to feel disappointment because that's a natural human feeling, but I don't dwell in it. I just find some way to cope with it, whether it means doing something that brings joy to me. And I always look at failure as an opportunity to learn. Every single time I fail at something, I have to go back and figure out what can I do differently next time. So for me, failure is always a really good opportunity to learn, even though that's not what I seek. Well, if you're one of those people who are like me, I hope this was informative. And if it was, I hope you're going to subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.